we can get started.
Yep, we're good to go. We're now recording.
Sweet. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to get the presentation set up here in a sec here. Hold on. Okay. Okay. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, you guys see my screen?
Yep. Yes, we're
Okay,
good.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right, welcome everybody to the final day of the Empower Your Career Conference. Hope everybody's been enjoying the videos, the presentations. Sorry, oh, wow, it's early. My name is Jamie Willis-Rose, and this is Power Up with PowerApps. I am a Power Platform developer. A little bit about myself. I got into the Power Platform through SharePoint. So I started in SharePoint as a SharePoint 2010 site collection admin, and then graduated to SharePoint Online, where I discovered the PowerApps and or actually it was Flow at the time, buttons, and that led me down the rabbit hole to the Power Platform. I started doing consulting work, and about 6 months ago now, and I've worked with commercial, nonprofit, and government industries. I work for a company called Applied Information Sciences, AIS for short. We are a consulting company. If you'd like to know more about us and the opportunities we have, you can visit our website at appliedis.com. Please say I said to you. And then I'm going to turn off my camera to save bandwidth. So then let's see here. You can follow us on Twitter. We have a Facebook page. We are on LinkedIn, and there is a blog. And I hear a mic open. If somebody has their mic open, could you mute it? Thank you. Unless you have a question, you can always stop me if you have a question. Objectives. What is PowerApps? Why should you use PowerApps? Demos. We're going to go through some demos. I'll show you how to build an app from SharePoint list. I'll also show you how to build an app from scratch. As we go, I'll talk about PowerApps best practices, and then hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Please take advantage of the chat window to ask your questions, and I'll get to them at the end. So if you have any, and then our moderator will be happy to pass those on to me, and we can have hopefully a good Q&A session towards the end here. So meet Bob. Bob loves Excel. How many of you know Bob at work who loves Excel? He loves Excel so much that he loves to share it with people through Outlook, through OneDrive, and now you have a lot of Excel. Way too much Excel. Then one day, Bob hears about this thing called PowerApps, and Bob wonders, what if I use PowerApps instead of Excel? Well, let's find out. First, though, what is PowerApps? So, first of all, there's several pieces to PowerApps. There's Canvas apps, there's model-driven apps, there's portals, and there's AI Builder. So these are pieces of PowerApps. I'm not going to talk about all of these in depth today. There's been some other sessions about these. If you didn't get a chance to see them, I highly recommend checking out the videos when they post them on YouTube. Why should you consider using PowerApps? Well, one of the reasons is it's actually one of the best low-code platforms out there. You can see in this quadrant, magic quadrant diagram from Gartner, that Microsoft is one of the leaders in the low-code space. And this URL will be posted here at the end of the session here. So if you can't write that down, I'll have that for you. But that is one of the reasons why it's a leader in the industry. I want to focus today on Canvas apps. Why? Because It's included with everyone's Office 365 subscription, asterisk being that you have to have at least an E3 or G3 if you're in the government space license. But if you have that, you should have access to PowerApps and Power Automate. It has a WYSIWYG designer. It's what you see is what you get. It's a very familiar way to design if you're comfortable using PowerPoint, for example. It's low code, not no code. And I'll get more into that as we go through the demo. It's cross-platform. It'll work on your PCs. It'll work on your mobile devices. It'll work on your tablets. So it's very easy to create solutions that will scale across an entire organization. It works with many different types of data sources. I think the last count, it's up to actually over 300 data connectors, and that is a way to not only work with Microsoft data natively, but also third-party data. So if your organization is using data in other systems, you can connect to almost anything now through PowerApps. And lastly, I'll just note that it does integrate well with Teams and Power BI. I'm not going to get into that today in this demo, but there have been other demos both here at the Empower Your Career sessions and also on YouTube. You can find videos talking about how you can integrate Canvas apps with Teams and Power BI. And I'll have some of those links in the end of the presentation. So let's get to the demo. Everyone loves demos. So my demo today is talking about the problem. The problem is I've got a lot of Excel. Bob loves Excel. Remember Bob? God love Bob. So Bob, here's an example of one of his spreadsheets. Not going to worry too much about the data. It's all dummy data anyway, but this is what it kind of looks like. So what I want to do is I want to solve this by taking it and converting it into a SharePoint list. So if you have a spreadsheet and you want to turn it into a SharePoint list, this is what you can do. You can take that spreadsheet and you can format it as a table. And it doesn't matter. You pick any style. It really doesn't matter for this. Then you want to export to SharePoint. There's actually an export button up here at the top. And you just export table to SharePoint list. And then you just have to type in or select the URL for wherever you're going. In this case, I'm going to type in my SharePoint site. And then give your list a name. You could add a description if you want. Then click Next. Then you can verify the data types. If you don't see what you like, you can go back and change the data types in the Excel spreadsheet by changing the format. I'm going to go ahead and click Finish. It's creating it, and then boom. It's a small amount of data, so it didn't take very long. So here we have my list. All the data is now in SharePoint. Just like that. So I've taken a spreadsheet and converted it into a list. Now, you may not be able to do that method. Not every situation is the same. So if you can't, the other possibility is either using copy and paste from an existing spreadsheet to an existing SharePoint list, or if you want to get into it, you can use Power Automate, which will allow you to actually automate the updating of SharePoint lists from a spreadsheet. I'm not going to get into that today, but it is possible. Just a quick word about the Common Data Service, or CDS. I am going to be using SharePoint as my data source today because it is included with Office 365, but it's not the best data source. I highly recommend, if you're getting into PowerApps, definitely learn CDS. And if your organization is new to PowerApps and the Power Platform, I'll have resources at the end of the presentation, but you really want to look at CDS first as your data source. It's the best way to go. And more on that later. So now let's get into the actual build. We want to build an app. So we have our data source. We've created our data source. Now we're going to build the app. So to create a Power App from SharePoint, just come up here and click Create an App. Then give it a name. It does have to be unique. So it's going to check, and it says, okay, you're good. And the create button is enabled. I'm going to click create. And that's going to launch PowerApps. And it's going to do its auto magical setup here. I'm going to just click get started. And then just like that, it's automatically populating your app, creating all the connections and adding all the controls and screens. And PowerApps is set up in a way, Canvas apps are, I should say. Here, I'll show you in a minute here. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to demo it by hitting play. So then here it is. I've got the app. It's working. I can click edit. There's my record. I can click cancel. I can go back. Very easy, simple as that. I built an app in a matter of seconds, basically. So I had a data source, and that was it. So if all you need to do is build a quick app, you can build it automatically with one click, and that you're done. Well, not really. Obviously, there's more to do, which is why we're going to continue on. For the rest of the demo, though, what I want to do is actually I want to kind of build a similar version of this app, but I want to do it from scratch so you guys can see kind of what happens when that automagical process is happening. So you kind of appreciate it more, but also learn some best practices as we go. So to build an app from scratch, I'm going to go into PowerApps, and I'm going to click on Create App from Blank. I'm going to give it a name. Oh, that name already exists, so it has to be unique. So I'm just going to add something, let's say V2. Then I have to choose a format. So right now, Canvas Apps is not truly responsive. You have to actually make a choice when you first create one between tablet and phone. Depending on your use case, one may be better than the other. Responsive design is possible, but it takes a little bit of work. And I'm not going to get into that today. There are some videos out there on that, and that is improving. So I chose tablet this time, and here we have the tablet layout. First thing I'm going to say, and I'll say this again and again, save early, save often. So the first thing you should do when you create your app from scratch for the first time is save it. To do that, just come with the file, check the name. Again, that's the name you gave it, but you can change it if you want to. You can select an icon, or you can add your own. You can do custom icons. You can pick a color from the color palette. You can add a description, which I recommend. It'll help you and others know what the app's for. Then click Save. Again, you can change the app name here if you want. It's much easier to set the app name now than it is later after you save it. So do it right the first time. All right, so there we go. Oh, again, as I said earlier, best practice is to, and wow, I'm a slow typer, is to actually add a description. So this will help your users. It'll help you differentiate apps later on down the line as your organization adds more apps. So definitely do your best to give a description here, and then you can use regular keyboard shortcuts like Control S to save. All right, so now I need to connect my app to SharePoint. Now, originally, when we created the first app, it was done for this step was done for us because we started with the data. Here, I'm starting with the app. So I need to actually tell the app where my data is. So I have to go in here, and on the left-hand side there, there's a little data sources icon. I'm going to click that. Notice there's no CDS, and that's because the default environment by default doesn't have a common data service. So I'm going to connect to SharePoint, verify that I had the right connection. You should see your email address, whatever you're using to log into PowerApps. Then once you click that, it's going to show you a list of available SharePoint sites. If you don't see it, you can type in the URL. Then I selected it, and then there's my list, supply requests. And then I click connect. And this is not the only way to add data to your app, but I just wanted to highlight this is one way. It's not the only way. But let's talk about environments. I think I talked about environments a second ago. I talked about the default environment. What are environments? Well, environments are containers. They're containers within your tenant. So on this diagram from Microsoft, you can see that a tenant can have multiple environments. So for example, in this diagram, you can have, let me see if I get my laser pointer working here. So you can have a production, a test, and a dev for different regions. And then down here, you can have security set up so that this user has access to all of these, and whereas this user can only access Australia and this user can only access USA. So environments allow you to secure your data and better protect it. And there's a whole blog post here about environments, which I'll also provide that link at the end in the chat window. All right. So I've got my data source. Now I need to start populating my app with controls and screens. So the way Canvas apps works are there are screens, and then on each screen you put the controls. So you can have multiple screens, and on each screen you can have many controls. So I'm going to come in here and let's show what's available. So you have labels, which is just plain text, buttons. You can have different types of text controls. There's inputs, and there's galleries, which you can use to display multiple items, forms. There's different types of media controls. There's chart controls you can use. There's icons, and if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, also included in this list are the shapes. So it should say icons and shapes, but it doesn't. You can also create your own what are called components, which are very cool. I won't get into that today. Then over here on the left here, where it says insert, you'll see the same things I just showed you, but in a different format. So it's easier to find what you need here, use the plus on the left-hand side. And there it says shapes and charts. So you can get to the shapes easier that way. So what am I going to add first? I'm going to add a gallery. Galleries are very helpful for displaying multiple pieces of information, like say from a list. So here's my list, and I'm going to connect to my data. And once I select that, it's going to automatically populate, but I need to change my layouts. And these are my layouts that are possible. So this time I don't need an image. I'm just going to select that. All right. So that's the gist of adding a control and connecting it to a data source. But there's some cool things you can do if you don't want to build everything totally from scratch. You can actually take advantage of templates inside your Canvas app. So let's do that. I'm going to add a screen using a template. So I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to go to a new screen. And these are the templates that come baked into PowerApps. As you can see, there's multiple templates to choose from. I'm going to choose the list template. So this adds multiple controls all together to give you a nice look and feel. All you have to do then is just connect to the data source, change your layout, and then you have your nice title at the top and then a gallery. And then you can adjust what information is actually being displayed in the gallery by selecting from this list of possible fields. I'm going to change the title. I don't think email is really helpful, so I'm going to change that to full name. There we go. And you can do whatever you want. And you can do more than this if you want to add more information. I don't need this screen anymore, so I'm going to delete it. Very good. All right, and then I'm going to do one more. I'm going to add another screen. This time I'm going to use just a blank screen. And now it's time to add the form. So I have a gallery that shows me all of my items, but I need to actually interact with it. Remember the first app we showed you, how it was a gallery, and then I went and clicked it and it went into the form. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm mirroring that same structure. So I'm adding a second screen this time to actually view the details for that particular item. To do that, on a new screen, I'm going to come up here and do forms. Always use edit, don't use display. Why is that? Because edit can do both. Display can only display. So again, you can use edit to display things, but you can't use display forms to edit. So I'm going to connect to my data source, and when I do that, it'll automatically create my form for me. You can adjust this. If you don't want all these fields, you can take some of that out. If it's missing fields, you can add them in as long as they exist in your data source. You can also change the layout. I recommend single column personally, but if you like multiple columns, you can do that. You can also change the layout so the labels are on the left or labels are on top. I think on top's better. And then I'm just going to copy, shift and click these two controls and paste them onto my other screen. That way we can actually have a similar look and feel. And then I can just adjust my form so that it looks nice. All right, so now I have two screens. I have a gallery on the first screen and I have a form on the second screen, but they're not connected to each other in any way. So I need to connect them together. So let's do that. So I'm going to come in here and where it says data source, I'm going to change this to item and see it's blank. So I want to set this to be whatever's selected in my gallery. So here's my gallery list 2, and there's actually a property called dot selected. So whatever is selected will be the item of record for this form. And there you go, just like that. Next, I'm going to go back to my gallery. Now I need to connect my gallery to send things to the form. So when people make a selection, it actually goes to that form. To do that, I have two options. One is the on select, or I can go to action and I can click navigate, and it'll automatically set it up for you. And there you go, navigate. And it adds transitions, which you have options on that as well. And I'm going to click it. There it is. And you get these dialogues which you can turn off after you see them the first time. Or leave them on if you want tips. Okay, so now I want to talk about form modes and we'll add an icon as well for editing. So forms have multiple modes, as I mentioned earlier when I talked about edit versus display. So here I have a form. I'm going to select it. And on the right-hand side there, you'll see the default mode is set to edit. There are 3 possible modes: edit, new, and view. So new is for a new record. Edit obviously is for making changes, and view is view only or read only. The default mode is whatever you want to use the form primarily for. I think view makes the most sense. I want things to be in read-only mode and then only go into edit mode when the user clicks a button. So I'm going to add that button now, or an icon. I'm going to change this to an edit button. I'm going to change the color so it pops a little better. And then I'm going to add a constructions that tells the form when this is clicked, I want you to put this form into edit mode. So to do that, first thing I'm going to do is actually write out a comment. So this is best practice tip number whatever it is. Always comment your code. You can use either 2 forward slashes or you can use a slash, asterisk, asterisk, slash format. And that'll help you if you come back and edit your app a month from now or 2 months from now or a year from now, and it will certainly help other users who have to pick up the app after you moved on to another project. So if the form mode equals view, edit form. So basically, if it's in view mode, I'm going to use the edit form function, which actually puts it into edit mode. Otherwise, put it into view mode or read-only mode. So now this is basically a toggle. So to show you what it looks like, there. See, it's toggling back and forth. Another best practice is reusing controls. So there's a limit in Canvas apps of about 500 controls per app. That's I don't know many people who create apps that have that many controls, but you never know. You may have a situation where you're building a very complex solution, and you may be pushing the upper limits of what Canvas apps can do. One way you can combat that is to actually take advantage of logic in your app and reuse a control. So depending on the situation, the control serves different purposes. So let's show what that looks like. So I'm going to take my app here. I'm going to change my icon depending on the situation. So I'm going to, instead of just being an edit icon, I'm going to actually do if this form mode is equal to edit, I want to display the edit button. Otherwise, display the cancel button. All right, let's try that out. Oh, I got it backwards. See, they're not right. I gotta switch the logic there. So that was my bad. So I'm just gonna change the order here. So there we go. Let's try that. So there we go. So now it toggles back and forth. One control does two different things. So let's add some more buttons or icons. I'm going to add a back button using another icon. Switch the icon to a back. You can search here. It's very handy. Add a navigation. No transition. Let's test it out. Okay, that works. Good. All right, looking good. Edit, cancel. That works. Good. All right. But what if I want to do a new item? To do that, I'm going to go back to my first screen and I'm going to add another icon. This time I'm going to leave the add button as is, and I'm just going to switch it to white. And from my on select, I want to do two things. I want to set the form 2 into new mode, and then I want to navigate to that screen. So I'm declaring that form to be in new, and then I'm going to go to it. And there you can see it's in new mode. All right, but I have my form, but how do I submit anything? Well, to do that, you need another button or icon. I'm going to use a button. So let's go to my screen with the form on it. And I'm going to go ahead and add a button. Excellent. All right. You can change the text really easily. You can say whatever you want. Obviously, I'm just going to keep it simple and just do submit. And then I have to actually tell it what to do. So when it's selected, what should it do? Well, there's actually a function called submit form, and I'll have a link to all the functions I'm using here at the end of this presentation, so you don't have to worry about remembering these functions. All right, and then I'll just adjust the form layout a little bit so that there's room there at the bottom for the button. All right. Oh, my cancel button. I want to change this, tweak this a little bit, because now I'm using the form to both view, edit, and new items. So I want the cancel button to work differently. So here I'm going to come in and let's go ahead and select the cancel button, and let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and copy this part here, Control C. And then I'm going to go here to the onSelect property. Basically, what I want to do is I want to change this to what if it's in new mode. So right now it's only if view, but you can actually do multiple conditions in an if statement in PowerApps. So as you'll see here in a sec, I'm going to type in a second condition. So right now, the first condition is if the form is view mode, do this or this. But I'm going to add a second condition here after the edit form. So if form mode is equal to new, then go back. And then also using a semicolon, I'm going to use a reset form. If you use a semicolon in an if statement, you can actually do multiple things inside the same condition. So I'm going to do two functions together if it's a new form. And then if all else fails, it'll put it into view mode. Last but not least, I want to give some feedback to my users. It's always good to give feedback to your users. You do feedback multiple ways, but there's a great little template that's built into PowerApps for a success screen. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to click new screen, and right there it's a success. And that adds it in. And this will be just a really simple screen to tell people, yes, your form was successfully submitted. And the on success property of the form itself is what you want to use to navigate to that screen. So you navigate to the screen, and there you go. So let's test it out. I'm going to click plus, and then I'm going to type in some dummy data. Apologies for my slow typing. Just want to make sure that my form is working. And this is always good best practice as you're creating an app, to make sure you have a good test environment to work in. So either a test SharePoint site or test CDS environment. That way you're not messing with real data. Excellent. So it was successfully completed. All right. And there's my actual record. All right, as promised, here's a URL which I'll post in the chat at the end. But this is a highly recommend you bookmark this. If you start getting into PowerApps development, especially Canvas apps, this particular page has been something I go to all the time. So definitely bookmark it. One of many resources, but having this at your fingertips, especially because they update it with new functions all the time. Not all the time, but they do update it. So as they add functionality to PowerApps. Next tip, naming conventions. So number one, define a naming convention for your organization. Number two, use it consistently across all your apps. So for you, for any other developers in your organization, stick to the same naming convention. That way, if projects get handed off, there's no confusion about what things are. Second thing, this comes directly from Microsoft. Keep in mind that screen names are read by screen readers. So use plain language for screen names. Don't use weird prefixes or strange, abbreviations. And then somebody's mic. Somebody trying to talk? Okay. So here I'm going to just do a quick demo of that. So I'm going to take this screen. I'm going to rename it Browse. And you can go to this white paper here, which I'll post the link at the end as well, for all the specifics here. I actually mistyped here, so I apologize. It should be ICO. But again, you could do IOC if you prefer, as long as you're consistent. Whatever your organization wants it to be. It could be ABC. I don't care. Just as long as you and your organization know what it means. I add the suffix of the screen name itself because I find that's really helpful to differentiate controls when I'm using them in functions. The most important thing, though, is just be consistent for you and all users on all apps. Some additional features I'll talk about. We can add a refresh button. So I've added the button already, and I'm just going to set the function to refresh, and I'm refreshing the underlying data source. So if you want to tell PowerApps, hey, could you check SharePoint and see if the data has changed? You can do that. Also, you can do searching. There's a search function. So I can do search, and then I can add in the search criteria, which in this case is a search text box or text input box. And then I can pick one or more columns. So however many columns you want to search on, if you want to search on one column, on 10 columns, it's all possible using the search function. Now you'll notice a little blue underline there. I'm going to talk about that in a second. But first I want to pick a few more columns. Got full name, department, and then I want to pick do item and close it out. Okay, so there's a little blue line there, and you look at the warning there when I roll over it. It says delegation warning. The search part of this formula might not work correctly on large data sets. Uh-oh. We'll come back to that. For now, though, let's just test this out. Seems to be working. See why. Pen. If I type pen and then I click on the item, you'll see that Jillian actually requested a pencil. And then if I come over here and I do, say, laptop or LAPT, Christina requested a laptop. All right, let's talk about delegations. So some sources are delegable, and that means that the data gets handled in the cloud at the data source. So when you make a request, all the requests happen at the data source level. Non-delegable functions or sources require all the data to be transferred to the app before the function can process the data. So if you see that little delegation warning icon, what's happening basically is it's telling you that it has to actually go to the data source, pull all the data in, and then run that function. And that can be a performance hit if you have a lot of data. It also can be an issue if you have a lot of data and it's more than, say, 2,000 rows, because that's the upper limit right now in Canvas apps. Anything over 2,000 and you're not going to get all your records. And actually, asterisk on that, by default, Canvas apps defaults to 500. You actually have to set it to 2,000 if you want it to go to 2,000. So keep that in mind. If you do see a delegation warning, don't ignore it. See what else you can do to address it. And keep in mind that it could just be that the data source you're using isn't supporting the function you're trying to do. And you might want to see if you can find a different data source. Hint, CDS. All right, let's talk a little bit about save versus publish versus share. So I already showed you how to save, but there's 2 more steps to actually get your app out into the world. So let's come back here and let's talk about first things first, saving. You can save it. You could add a version note, which I didn't do in this video, but you could do a version note, which is useful for other developers to see and yourself. Then you could publish it. You can do that immediately, or let's check out all versions. So this is the version history for your app. Every time you click save, it creates a new version. That's helpful. If you have to roll back, if you make a mistake, you can roll back. But notice here on the right-hand side, the last live version was version 1. So if I play this right now, outside of the studio where we were editing it, this is what's actually out there in the world. This is the first version that's actually live, and you notice it has nothing. No screens, no controls, nothing, because it was a blank app when I first created it. This is the app as it exists right now in the Canvas studio as I'm editing it. So this is the version 7 that we're working on right now. So if I want people to see that, I have to actually publish it. You can do that here. Select it and click publish this version. Or you can go back to the Canvas app studio and I can just click publish. And it'll tell you some information about it. Now, you're not done yet. Just because you publish it doesn't mean that people can use it. It just means that it's now here and front-facing for people who have access to it. So what I have to do now is if I want people to use this app, I have to actually give them access to the app. So that comes to sharing. So you can share to everyone in your organization, which may work for some situations. It'll send an email to everyone, so you might want to turn that off. You also have the option to pick individual users. Pick myself. If you pick individual users, you can make them co-owners. I highly recommend, best practice, to have at least 2 people own an app once it's in production. The original creator and the owner, and then someone else. You can also use security groups, which I didn't do in this video. Just keep in mind that just because you share the app with someone does not mean you shared the underlying data. So you have to share the data too. So I didn't do that in this video, but if you're using a data source like SharePoint, they have to have access to that SharePoint list. So keep that in mind. And best practice would be to use lists, security group lists, so you don't have to manage your security in 2 places. And if you don't have or don't know how to do that, I highly recommend talking to your company's IT department because it will save you some headaches down the line. All right, some more best practices as we wrap up. I already showed you a link to this before, but just to reiterate, there is a coding standards white paper from Microsoft. Highly recommend having this on hand if you're just getting started. It's really helpful. And even if you're not just getting started, if you've been at it for a while and you have never looked at this, I highly recommend checking it out. Again, it's not important that you follow this to the letter. It's important that you have a standard and that you follow it inside your organization. There's also a white paper on accessibility. I didn't really touch on this at all in my demo, but especially if you work in the government space, especially in the US, there are accessibility laws that require you to worry about this stuff. And depending on where you are in the world, you may have similar laws. And it's just best practice. Make your apps accessible. And this particular white paper will help you with that. And there's some other great resources on the web as well, if that's something that you're interested in learning more about. My company does a thing called the Power Platform Adoption Framework, which is actually now open source. You can follow this link and read all about it. You can also find it on GitHub. GitHub. Apologies. So definitely check that out if you want to learn more about how to use the Power Platform at scale inside your organization. It's a good read, as they say, and you can reach out to me or any of the team members at AIS to talk more about it. Some more resources. If you're in PowerApps, you can come in here and there's actually an app that you can actually create for training. That you can just come in here, and when you take a look at it, it'll actually walk you through all the things that you need to know about PowerApps right there inside the app. So it's very handy for learning PowerApps, and it's from Microsoft. So that's also very cool. Other things that I highly recommend, if you haven't already done it, is join your communities. There is online communities. Obviously, we're all social distancing right now, or spatial distancing. So online resources are the key right now to staying in touch with people. And the community is very active and a great place to meet people and get and learn. So each one of these platforms has its own community, but you can follow this URL to connect to all 4 of these. There's also another set of communities run by another company outside of Microsoft called the Power Platform User Groups community. It's actually run by a company called Dynamic Communities. If you guys are in the dynamic space, you may also be familiar with some of their other communities related to Dynamics. Their obviously primary goal is running local user groups, but given the circumstances right now, a lot of our local user groups are going virtual. So you can find access to webinars and meetups all over the world. And so it's a great time actually to meet people from all over the world who are having virtual user groups. I'm actually planning on attending one in New Zealand later this month. So I'm excited for that. So depending on where you are in the world, you may be able to find one that works for you, your local time, and meet some some new people. Which leads me to this very new addition to the world. Chris Huntingford from Microsoft created a website called Virtual Events Hub. I'll post this link as well. I highly recommend joining this. You can actually subscribe to the calendar that's on this website and add it to your calendar on your device. And it will show you all the virtual events that have been added to that calendar. And so you'll know right there in your fingertips what's available. And if you are running a virtual event, please add it to this calendar so that people know about it and can join, so everyone knows. And this is not just for Power Platform. This is for anything Microsoft related. If you want to know more about PowerApps, there's a monthly community call. You can download the ICS for your device and have it on your calendar. There's recordings available on YouTube. Again, these links will be available in the chat at the end. The next one, I believe, is on April 15th. The dates sometimes do change thanks to COVID-19, but definitely subscribe to the calendar invite there and check it out. Power Addicts. I'm not sure if there's any other Power Addicts on the call right now, but I know Vivek is presenting later this afternoon, or afternoon in the US, I should say. Sorry for those of you in other parts of the world. He is one of the founders of the Power Addicts. If you are on Twitter, follow the hashtag Power Addicts. If you're on YouTube, you can search for the Power Addicts YouTube channel. And definitely keep your eyes peeled. They do a monthly call that you can join on Teams, and it's a great place to chat and talk and learn things. App in a day. If you're new to PowerApps, I only skimmed the surface of what's possible with PowerApps. I didn't even get into model-driven apps. Highly recommend this particular day-long training. Hard to find right now in person, obviously. Sessions. Microsoft usually does free ones at their local tech centers. Obviously, that's not happening right now, but there are individuals, companies that are hosting virtual ones, so you may be able to find a virtual app in a day somewhere in the world. Some more links I'll post. These are some great resources. These are, as I mentioned earlier, delegation is a whole headache, so I posted some links to specific delegation resources. And remember Bob? Well, Bob, he started using PowerApps, and now everybody's happy. So I hope you guys learned something, and we'll go ahead and go to our next part, which is the Q&A part. Anybody have any questions? Let's see here. Profil, where can I see recording of the session? I believe it'll be on YouTube. Coding language. PowerApps uses its own coding language, I believe. It doesn't have a name. It's based loosely on the Excel language that was used in Excel. So if you're familiar with writing Excel functions, it should be similar. Can I see this PowerApps on Play Store? I'm not sure. You mean like Google Play?
Yeah, you can get the PowerApps for mobile on the Play Store.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yes, it's available on Android and iOS. And then that's for using PowerApps. And then if you want to create PowerApps, you can use it on any modern browser, assuming you have a license. And I will post my links now. I have a whole bunch of links. Hopefully Hopefully it doesn't overwhelm you guys. But there's all my links from the whole presentation. And then the other thing is, and I don't have that link there. There's also, if you're totally new to this and you want to find a way to, if you don't have it with your work, you can get a developer account from Microsoft, and also if you have a work email address you can use, you can also sign up for a community plan, which is kind of a misnomer. It's more, it should be called a developer plan. That gives you your own personal environment. You can't use that environment to share anything with, but you can use it to learn. So I highly recommend that. All right, if anybody wants to stay in touch, I'm on Twitter. I'm also on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me. That's my QR code. If you have the LinkedIn app, you can scan it. If not, just look me up either Twitter or what more can we do with PowerApps? We can do a lot more with PowerApps. Yes, Talal, yes. So Ryan, you can do a lot more with PowerApps. This was just a taste. Definitely check out some of the other sessions, either coming up today or go back and look at some of the recordings. For example, you can take a Canvas app and you can put it inside a Power BI report and create interactions between Power BI and a Power App. You can take Canvas apps and model-driven apps and put them together and create really cool solutions. You can put Power Apps inside SharePoint pages. What else can you do? Let's see. There's a lot of, I mean, the sky's the limit. It's really up to your imagination. Talal, you can package, if you use solutions, it's very easy to move apps from environments to environments. Solutions, though, require CDS. So that's an additional licensing. Fuzzy search logic. It searches search based. I don't know what you mean by fuzzy, but the search function searches within the text. So it's front, middle, back of the text. There are certifications. There was actually a great presentation yesterday by Vicki Rogers. If you missed it, you should check it out. I believe it was, she called it dynamic certification, but just spoiler alert, dynamics and the Power Platform are the same thing. Some people find out dynamics may not want me to say that, but it's true. So if you're in the dynamic space or you're using dynamics, you are using the Power Platform. Highly recommend, look for that presentation when they post it and watch it, her video, and connect with her on LinkedIn. She has some great resources on certifications. I'm not a certification expert. There are certifications available, though, depending on what you want. She has some great advice, though, on like where you should get started, depending on what your experience level is. She had a whole diagram. Gulshan, yes, you want to look for a presentation that was done yesterday on PowerApps portals. It was a PowerApps Portals 101, or you can Google it and find other content. John Levesque, I think, has done some content on portals. Portals is how you can allow people outside your organization to interact with data inside your organization through PowerApps. And that is an additional licensing. It's not included in your Office 365 subscription. The survey is here. I believe I put the link in my long list of links there. If you don't want to scan the QR code, please fill out the survey if you can, and check out all the other great presentations that are happening. And I think the next one's starting in 4 minutes. If you guys have nothing else, did I get everybody's question? Did I miss anything? Mute your mic if I missed your question. You have 4 minutes. Okay. Well, I guess I'll give you guys a 4-minute break to get set up for the next session. We can stop the recording, I guess. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it. And hope you all have